Good morning. Sorry I'm late. Stories, life has stories. And so this morning, as my excuse for why I'm late, we went on a walk, my partner and I, to grab a coffee. He's not really a coffee person, but he wanted one. And on our walk, we found this lorikeet, and looked like he was injured, like walking on the ground, not flying, crawling his way up the tree. But it tricked us. And so after we had gone home to get sunflower seeds for it, it actually then flew away. But anyways, here now, and today what we're gonna go over is a back release. So I'm a huge fan of working the lumbar spine and working the relationship between our lumbar spine and our pelvis. So why I'm standing up is so that I can correct my own pelvic position. And why I am such an advocate of it is that I have spent quite a few years working on research and on low back pain. And what I do is a style of research called creating systematic reviews, where you aren't necessarily creating trials and working with participants, you're actually using those trials and resynthesizing the data to create an output for a question that you have. So you search all of the trials that are out there, pull in the ones that are relevant and the most high quality, create all of that data into new formats so that then you have a huge population base that you're working with and a huge amount of trials that you're working with, and narrow it down to ones that are the most specific to your question, and then you create really high quality research. So I've done this with back pain, and I'm about to start another one with this. And what I've come to realize is that regardless of the form of treatment, in the sense of, do we do conservative management, do we just promote physical activity by saying going walking, do we do really specific types of exercise treatments, do we do manual therapy and all the different various forms of manual therapy, it always comes down to two simple aspects. And a lot of researchers may be really upset with me for saying this, but it's really general. And one is understanding how a neutral pelvis and a neutral lumbar spine curve interrelate. So why I say this is that most of people out there that I see, whether there's low back pain or not low back pain, they have a hard time finding a neutral pelvis. So either they sit in a position like this, where it's a very tucked under, rounded spine. Hey Barb, I'm just going through the beginnings of sources of back pain through pelvic lumbar position. So the two end ranges that I see are, we sit in a posterior pelvic tilt. This posterior pelvic tilt gives us a more rounded or flattened low back curve, which then causes a whole bunch of strain on, of course, our muscles back here, but particularly on the disc. So this type of position tends to lead to more of a risk for disc injuries. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which I have a hard time getting into, but because I don't have that tilt as naturally, but people that sit more like this. And this, you can see, is this really deep anterior tilt, an extreme lumbar curve, where this is in a hyperlordotic position. And so in this, you get this hyperactivity of all of your back muscles. So then you get it's just a huge amount of tension come from this holding here. This is the position that tends to correlate with short hip flexors. This is a position that tends to correlate with a poor correlation between deep abdominals and finding, the return to a more neutral position. So in a neutral position, this is more close to a neutral position. Why I emphasize this is because it's really hard for us to find, and if we don't know neutral, then when we go to do release work, it may not actually be fully beneficial if you aren't releasing yourself into a more neutral position. So I'm going to jump straight into doing the release technique that I was showing, because I'll show you what we often do. So laying on our back is that people often lay in the position like this, where they have that flat spine and they do rotation. And that is great and wonderful for many, many reasons, but it doesn't fully hit the mark for releasing low backs, because in a low back position, you have a very neutral curve, which is about this high, where your hand can slide underneath your back. In that, when you have this position and you come into your rotations, it has a completely different impact on all the muscles that connect into your spine. Because here, short, 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 all of this, you get a different placement of each of your lumbar vertebrae. With those different placements, you get different loading. And so when we come into more of a neutral tilt, so if, say, your hands are just underneath your pelvis and you rotate, you'll already feel it move up a little bit higher into the sides, you're more into your obliques. But then also, most commonly, people notice different levels of our spine rotating and maybe feeling clicks or feeling resistance. So why I talk about that, because that brings me to the second part, is that when we have signs that we may be increasing the chances of developing low back pain, first, yes, is that lumbopelvic position, but the second that comes from that is learning or recognizing how to alter and equalize the load between our lumbar segments. Because what we often see then is that people that develop these more long-term pains is that there are some regions that do an excessive amount of work. So really hyperactive muscles around that region, or regions of that vertebra moving an excessive amount while other regions don't. And so then you go through all these corrective mechanisms of trying to, mobilize or release some of the regions so that they can help support the load, then stabilizing the regions that get a lot of load so then it can redisperse, etc. So it comes into this sort of this plus minus equalizing concept. So instead of being in a position where you get to that point and you actually have more clear pain, it's best to prevent that. And to preventing that is when you start getting indications of stiffness from long-term sitting or long-term standing, or just feeling uncomfortable after a normal daily activity, whatever it may be. What you really want to be doing is helping yourself then so that it doesn't progress into something larger, something more intense over time. It's because most back pain that I see are situations that have been from a cumulative buildup. There are far less that I see that are traumatic incidents. Of course they do occur, but most of the time it's not like a really acute injury at that moment. Most of the time it's because of the way that the body has been used over time, and that building into a pattern, and that pattern causing aggravation and pain. So now coming back into the release that I find that I really like. Oh, yay, tightness experience, yes. So that's what we're gonna get to. And that's where I really do like this stuff, is that you can play with the region. So that's what we're gonna get to, and I'll show you the two things that I think are most important, because our our wrists or fists can feel uncomfortable when we're doing this. I find it's actually quite important to have the right position. So instead of holding a fist like this, I hold my fist like that. So then I use this flat part on the ground, and then this part of my knuckles, yes, and that's exactly, so my favorite, Barbara said something about the QL area. So that's where the go-to spot is definitely QLs. So that's where I tend to start, and then I move up and down from there depending. So that's what we'll go through, because we want to use these knuckles on either side of our spine. So if I turn around, so if we're in this position, instead of putting it on the spine, on the side where you can feel the clear bulk of our spinal erectors. So laying back down, take the fist, one on either side of the spinal column, and then you'll know you're in the right spot because you'll feel more thickness. If you're too wide, you'll feel more gushiness. If you are too narrow, you'll feel hardness. So thickness is sort of the good indicator. And instead of keeping your bottom up, let your bottom down. Let your bottom and your feet take most of your weight, and let your spine curve around your fists. And then you rotate left and right. So the first starting spot, as Barb indicated, is the QL area. And where that is that you have where your low ribs end, and then you have where your pelvis starts. In between that spot is a muscle called quadratus lumborum. It is a muscle that gets hyperactive when we don't use our glutes well, when we don't use our abdominals well, and when we tend to have this emphasis of low back doing most of the work. It creates an imbalance, sort of the listing pelvic position. But then when we do this, what you'll find is that you can vary in degree of pressure. And so this is where you can really individualize it for yourself. So Barbie might like this next little tip, is that as you turn to the side, so right now I'm going to turn to my right, I use my abdominals here to press down just lightly into my fist as I rotate. So with that downward press using my core, it lengthens my low back, creating a bit more of a massage or myofascial release sensation into your back. So same thing, pressing down on the side that your knees turn to, and then release. After you've got comfortable with doing this in the QL region, and when you recognize that it's time to change, depending on your shoulder range of motion, you can move up higher, so you can come up more behind your diaphragm, or you can move down lower to more where sacroiliac joint is. So of course you can find all of these segments and transitions in between those, but that's the beauty of being able to do self-release. When you can do your own self-release, you can find the spots that really make an impact onto your body, and then you can play around into it. The more we can learn about how our body feels pain, where our body feels pain, and what helps our body when it does feel pain, the more likely we are able to relieve ourselves of these issues. And the key word is to rely on ourselves instead of relying on a practitioner. As a practitioner, I find my most important goal is to teach everybody the skills that they need so that they can take care of themselves instead of coming to me and being dependent on me. So that's what you want to start with, is how and where can I help my spine? So if you move up higher, you'll notice that you have a different sensation than when you're lower. Automatically, I get little cracks in that upper region of my spine. But then if I play once again with my pelvic tilt and where my abdominals are activated, so do I press down more on my tailbone? Do I press down more with my belly button? Do I press down more with my ribs? All of these tiny little or subtle little changes make quite a large impact to which level of your spinal vertebra, which level of your lumbar vertebra are mobilizing. So then release, find a new spot, maybe a little bit lower. I find that spot right above your sacroiliac joint, so you have your back dimples, putting your fists then on either side slightly above your back dimples, and rotating here, you'll have them much smaller of a motion, and that's because classics 101s of manipulation or mobilization of the spine, the smaller the pelvic rotation, the lower in the spine, the larger the pelvic rotation, higher in the spine. Oh, hello, Sim. So as you're mobilizing and going left and right, you'll find these vertebra segments that have less mobility, and that then you can really isolate to help release for yourself. So once again, once you find a spot, maybe it's you quite clearly on left side or right side, you can also pulse. So tiny, tiny little twists just on that side that feels quite restricted. And then release and go back to the first. So as I've said on other videos, and I'll come up so I can speak to the camera. As I've said in other videos, what I'm trying to teach right now are basic or foundations. So they're the most important starting points to build on top of. Once we learn foundations and really grasp it in intellectually, but then also in your body, you have this capacity to excel and progress in ways that are much more creative and a lot more free and individualized for your own body. So it is important to learn the basics and really master the basics. Then from there, you'll be able to move into a space that you will be able to move and practice and take care of your body in the way that your body wants to be cared for, not the way that your mind wants to care for it or the way that your practitioner wants to care for it. Your practitioner's goal is really to support you in your learning process, to help you become capable of caring for yourself. And if your practitioner doesn't do that, I don't know, I don't trust them. But that's me. I'm quite stubborn with people that I trust as practitioners and teachers. So with saying that, I hope I didn't offend anybody. But I think that most practitioners would agree. And I will leave there unless there's any questions. I'm glad you agree, Barb. Otherwise, this might get awkward. But I will keep showing more and more foundations that we can all build off of, different regions of the body. I'm going to do another one with the low back this week. Instead of rotations, it's going to be more of the tilting so that people can, well, we all can start to learn more clearly how and where your pelvic tilts and what imbalances we have. And yes, exactly, helping them to help themselves. That's really a practitioner's one-on-one goal, is how can I help you to help yourself so that you can be empowered and reliant on your own abilities to care for yourself instead of coming to me and depending on me or any other practitioner. I'm happy to hear that's how you think too, Barb, because not all practitioners or businesses run that way. So, yes, with that, big love. And stay healthy and sane. Keep moving your body. That will help your mind be a bit more settled instead of feeling stagnant and stuck inside. The more you move, the more free you'll be able to feel, and hopefully the more settled. So thanks for checking in. I'll speak to you all soon.